Hi, everyone. Welcome to the China Experts. This is our fourth episode in this series, and today we've got Paul McCourt on here today to explain his company's China journey. So, Paul, welcome. And if you could just briefly introduce what Hamilton does and what your role is in the company as well.
Okay, Hamilton is a manufacturing company, a family business established in 1968 in the UK. We make electrical accessories, sockets and switches for the decorative market, sort of metal, and we have different sort of finishes, really for the high-end market, for the apartment, the high-end hotel, and we export from the UK. And for the last 15 years, we've been buying our components from China, from suppliers in China, and we then assemble the product in the UK for the UK market and export. About 5 years ago, it was suggested to us with the Chinese middle class emerging and probably traveling to Europe quite a bit, and they see all the finishes in their hotels, etc., that they would be an opportune moment to get us into China, into that market. So my task as the director of business operations was to set up a business in China. And I went to a couple of conferences run by the CBBC and Christina.
That's the China Britain Business Council.
Right.
Just to highlight the CBBC.
Yeah, it's the China Business. What was it?
China Britain Business Council.
That's right, Britain Business Council. You have to edit that one. To see what was involved, and I latched on to Christina was doing a talk there about the pitfalls of entering China and be careful how you approach it. So I saw her after one of the presentations, and she gave me her card, and we connected. And then that was a long journey. Felt like going down the China Wall, but it's been a long journey. I learned a lot with the help of Christina and her staff to really set up the business. We set up an office in Shanghai in a serviced office building, which would happen to be the same building as Christina's operation, Woodburn. And we then went about applying for everything. I think there's been so many, it's probably been 1,000 forms I had to fill in or get my MD to fill them in. Half were in Chinese and half were in English.
Yep.
But we got there in the end. We set it all up and we were ready to enter the market. And then COVID struck. And basically for the last three and a half years, we couldn't travel into China. So everything went on hold. Everything was mothballed. And then during that time, I didn't realize, even though the company is dormant, that there has to be monthly returns for VAT, tax, quarterly returns. The company has to be audited once a year. And all that information has to be done, even though we weren't trading. So obviously, Christina's people were very helpful in that, because I didn't realize that at all. They've done all that for us. And so that makes it much easier for us to just maintain the company. And then when we started to think about China, the reason we wanted to set up a company, because we wanted to control our own destiny in China. We wanted to find out who we were going to deal with. We wanted to set our own pricing. We wanted to control our importing and distribution. But I suppose with COVID, it made us focus and say, well, what do we want to be involved in this? Because we had another similar competitor that went to China, but they went through a distribution network or a company that did all that for them. So all they were doing was supplying the company in China, and they did everything else, all the marketing, support, etc. So obviously, my MD said, well, I think based on where we are, and based on the cost of supporting a company that we're not using, we should decide to liquidate the company I set up 4 years ago, and go through a distributor who we can then work with. I think it's very important. I think Christina said this at the time, that you need to have some local representation on the ground, because China is different. The way they do business is different. And trying to go over there and understand it will take some time. But if you had some local representation, it made it much easier.
Sure.
So I think we decided to go that route.
And I think also your goal was to hire people yourself on the ground that were going to act as this local representation. But of course, building up a team when you can't travel over there, you can't do face-to-face interviews, it's going to be all through video conferencing, and then you're laying the trust in this team is difficult versus going with a potentially a reputable company that's going to do the actual distribution work and develop the sales channels initially, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I forgot to mention that when we first started inquiring about China, we had a brand squatter in China.
I remember that. I wasn't sure if you wanted to discuss it or not.
Well, I'm saying it to give people,
Absolutely, you should.
to be
yes.
careful to get your IP and everything copyright ready.
Yeah.
But even if you have that, sometimes you have a brand squatter to fight against.
I think that was also something that held you back initially, because in our first meeting at the CBDC event, you were in the process, I believe, of litigating this company in China, who had squatted the brand, and trying to figure out solutions to get in and be able to sell the brand, the products with that brand name, right?
Well, we weren't aware. I mean, this brand squatter had been operating for 5-6 years before we found out. I mean, the only reason we found out is we had a supply coming out of Ningbo port, and it got stopped because customs said this did not belong to us.
Right.
So of course it belongs to us. It's R Hamilton. No, that R Hamilton is registered in China.
Yeah.
So we did an investigation. We found this company had trucks with the name on the side. We have a personalized A in Hamilton. They even took that and copied it. And they wanted a lot of money to go away, but we weren't prepared to do that. So we fought them through the various avenues. And as you said, Christine, it took a long time.
Yeah. So
I think without that, without your preparation, I think you've always said in your talks, it's preparation, preparation, preparation. Don't just suddenly go into China and think we can do business.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, because you could catch a cold.
Yeah. How would you do different? Let's not bring COVID into the picture. I mean, I think COVID was a big stumbling block for you. But regardless of COVID, how would you have done things differently, Paul, if there would have been no COVID?
I don't think. I mean, we were geared up to come into China through that company. It had an import license, and we studied how we would get the product in, where we would store it, and we would hook up with 3 or 4 distributors and supply locally. But then you start thinking about, if you do generate a big business in China, you actually want to get some revenue back into the UK as well.
Mm-hmm.
And with the tax laws and everything, it can be difficult. We started thinking about, if we were too successful, what would that mean? And the thing is that we were trying to control was, because China is such a big place. I mean, I was amazed first time I was dealing with China. I mean, is it Shanghai has 26 million people in the area of Shanghai, which, and if you sold it to sort of 0.001% of the population, you probably have more work than you could cope with. So it's very difficult to sort of control the business in that situation. So I think, I mean, whether we would about how we would set up our business model in China, and we got a lot of feedback from you. I remember meeting you in a hotel in on Heathrow to go through some plans and some thoughts, and you've been on the end of a phone
Mhm.
time now. So
But
I
you
think
also, I mean, you had also reached out to lawyers and
yes, we've got our own IP lawyers in London who had links to Chinese lawyers.
yeah,
When we did our distribution agreement, we went to London and sat with the Chinese lawyers
yeah,
who had, I think they say, 1,000 lawyers in China alone in their company.
Mm.
And but again, you use the big companies, you're paying a lot of money.
sure.
So to set up a distribution agreement that you could use, it takes a lot. But without that in place, you run the risk of, your business could be, taken for a ride in a sense.
Sure.
So it's a catch-22. If you have to invest in the business in China, and if you're investing a lot of money, which we were, you've got to make sure it's done correctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think so. To answer your question, I'm not too sure. With hindsight, yes, we might have now gone and spoken to a couple of distributors and say, look, we'll supply you as long as we make our margin. We don't care what you sell it for in China. So if you're making 200% margin on our product, good luck to you.
Sure.
As long as we make our decent margin, we'll just supply you, and off you go. And I think that we've got a similar distributor in the Middle East, in Dubai, where we've set up a business model on that basis. So we supply them, and they have a chain of stores and outlets, and they sell in that environment Hamilton products. So we're not investing in setting up, various different. So I think that you learn as you go along, but I think to me the China trip was very interesting. I mean, it's
I think it still is. I think there are issues though in regards to border controls and COVID regulations that make it prohibitive for a lot of people to really set foot into the market properly, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, and I say it all the time, going into China is not cheap.
No.
You have to invest time, you have to invest financial resources into it. And if you don't do it properly, then you can hit certain pitfalls and not get it done right. And then in the end, you exit the market with a bad taste in your mouth.
Yeah. I mean, it was slightly different for us because we've been in China from a supply point of view.
Right.
So we and our directors go over there. Well, before COVID, they used to go at least once or twice a year.
Right.
To visit suppliers, talk about new products, designs, etc. So they were quite used to dealing with Chinese companies. And I was always amused. They promised to take me one day, but they never did. So then COVID set in. So
it will happen. It will happen.
But it's funny because I was quite amused. Everyone in China we deal with has got a Christian name like Harry or Fred or Mike. And a supplier came over to the UK, and I met with him here, and his name was Ringo. And I'm thinking, you don't look like Ringo to me. But obviously that happens because we can't really pronounce their names anyway. So,
sure.
But we find it very easy to deal with China from a supply point of view. Whether now we're going to enter the market in a different business model, I think that would be a little bit easier for us.
Sure. And once you scale to a certain volume or value in size, then you can always set up a company again.
Yeah.
And take control.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's just that this phase could take 2 years, it could take 5 years, it could take 10 years. But what's nice is you're not giving up on the market. You're just finding another sales strategy, business model to.
Yeah, it's a huge market, and there's enough there for everyone to have a piece of.
Sure.
But just beware of the pitfalls, especially with brand squatting and the cost of getting everything right.
Right.
And sometimes you need volume to compensate that. When you've got volume, do you look at the tax-free zones to store your products, or do you ship it? I mean, it's a long way to ship it as and when needed. So if someone phones up and says, I need 100 of these, you can't suddenly put it in the van and run it up to London.
Right. Right.
You have to export it and ship it, customs, everything. So,
Right.
and the other thing from our industry, I'm not too sure if it applies to everyone, is the certification of the product. We have to
please do share that experience a little bit.
Before we could sell into China, we had to have our products, our range, certified by a laboratory in Beijing. So we had to.
This is for the 3C certification.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we also had to have a visit from their company acting on their behalf in London, who came down and did an audit of the factory to make sure that we had the processing right in place. They're very keen to find out if the product went wrong in China, how would we replace it, how we would support it, and how we would build it, specification. And that took us a bit by surprise. And a lot of the times we are sort of, I know, a typical socket would have maybe 10 different finishes, bronzes or whites or silver, etc. But it's the same mechanism inside, but we still had to provide 10 variations of that to the laboratory to check. So we were sending out hundreds of samples to Beijing to be certified. And then we've just had an audit now, because the audit is every year now. And we haven't actually produced anything at the moment. We're waiting for the sales to kick off before we set up our production line. But it still had to be audited by the Chinese, etc. And
to maintain the 3C certification.
Correct. Because if you don't get it and you lose it, then you got in trouble.
Yeah, well, then you have to start all over again in any case.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a bit of a nightmare from that point of view. But we've got there. We've got a product now, a range of products. Again, we didn't go for the whole range for China to start with. We wanted to see how it went. So, I mean, in our catalog, we have up to 25,000 items that you can order, variations. But we didn't start with that. We've got sort of a very simple ranges and maybe 4 or 5 different finishes to find out if that goes well with China.
How did you evaluate the ranges of products that you were going to sell into China? I mean, out of the 25,000, how did you find that little niche for the ones you finally picked out?
Well, in the UK, that 25,000 has started, way back 50 years ago with a small range, and it's built up over the years. I mean, so we sort of thought again with China, okay, what's the basics that they would need? They would need maybe a different ampage sockets. They would want USB connections on the sockets for charging. They would need this, and for switches, they would need wide rockers and different types of which currently is sort of what people want in their apartments or hotels. And we're thinking, well, if they came to Europe, they would probably stay in a hotel or an apartment with that in there. So let's replicate that. So that's how we sort of decided to have a smaller range to start with. But you can have maybe 40 different finishes to
each range, each unique product.
Yeah. So it's we're waiting to see what happens there.
Right.
And it's always the case is what you've got is what the people don't want. They want something different. But obviously from a startup business, what you don't want is a lot of customization.
Of course.
So you want to try and get that standard in there. And the education, I mean, we stayed away from dimmers because we heard that the Chinese do not like their rooms to be dark or dim. They like bright lights. So we did a little bit of market research there. We came out with a sort of shortened brand because Hamilton is not known as a product in China. So we had a problem trying to get the name from this brand squatter. So in between, we set up a HLS, which is short for Hamilton Litestat 68, which was the years it was founded. But also we believe that the 6 and 8 are lucky numbers for Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's all the other things that sort
So
of
you
fit
actually
together.
did a rebranding exercise.
Yeah. So, but
And
now
is that a new brand you're going to use globally, or is it specific to China?
it's just for China because the
Interesting.
electrical fitments and stuff are different in China than if it's. I mean, we tend to sell normal UK electrical to countries that were part of the UK Empire or part of the British Empire or whatever in the old days, and they've stayed with that type of setup. So we sell a lot into the Middle East, and we've got quite a bit of setup in Hong Kong. So where there's a lot of British expats or those are areas, what we don't set up. Yeah, so it's completely new business. I think it's not like a sort of franchise from McDonald's where, okay, we'll just set up another McDonald's in Shanghai and let them come in and off you go. I don't know whether the burgers in Shanghai in McDonald's are different to the ones in Europe. We're just assuming that if you go and ask for a cheeseburger, you get the same as if you do in London, but it could be totally different, just called a cheeseburger. So because the Chinese might like a different spicy taste or whatever. So again, it is different. It's a bit like I worked a lot in my career in the States. I didn't go east, I went west. And just because Americans speak the same language, they are different country, different culture, different way of doing things. And when you go over there for business, you have to learn that. You can't just assume that everyone's going to be, put the Union Jack up and say, right, we're now British. So,
I'm sure some people would like that, but it's not going to happen.
But working over there, I had a couple of teams in the systems side over there, and they work differently. You have to motivate the staff differently in America, because the Americans tend to act first and think about it secondly. So let's throw resources at it. I'm like, there's a problem here. Let's work out the problem is, and then we can sort it.
Right.
But what I'm saying is it's different countries, different requirements, different audience, different way of doing business. And I think China was a challenge to us.
Well, don't give up. I mean, you've still found a solution to get into China. We've got to stay positive, and hopefully these new sales channels, working with these distributors, will be a good starting point to really kick off selling into China now. And who knows what will happen in the next 12, 24 months if that really pushes forward.
I think what we got to do is, I'm talking to you the other day, I think we got to divorce politics from business. And I think that let the politicians, fight out between them, but hopefully business will come down.
Continue and be stronger. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. My feeling as well.
Okay.
All right. Well, Paul, that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining.
Okay.
And who knows, maybe I'll have you on in a year's time and we'll see where you guys are at and how things are pushing forward.
Lovely. Okay.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Bye.